I've been a physician for years and I exercise daily, I eat well, I take my health seriously for the most part. And still I was aging faster than I realized because of these 7 things that I'm going to talk about today. These are things that I didn't think applied to me or I had completely normalized them. In this video, I'm exposing 7 silent habits that quietly accelerates aging after 50. And I'm going to tell you exactly what you can do instead. It's not missing days and days of exercise or having a full birthday cake. It's things that feel fine. The things that look normal, they look healthy on the surface, but they're not. It's the things that you've been doing for years without a second thought. I certainly have been doing them. And I found out the hard way, not from patients, but from looking honestly at my own habits and looking at the research. Even when I was working out daily, eating mostly healthy nutrition, I was still feeling fatigued, foggy, not quite myself. And it took some data, some research, and some uncomfortable honesty to figure out why. So here are 7 things I've found, and I'm going to share them with you today. And I'd be willing to say at least a couple of these things apply to you. So habit number 1 is counting hours in bed, but ignoring sleep quality. Boy, I was guilty of this. Most people think that if you get 7 to 9 hours of sleep, then you're good. And I thought the same thing for years. And then I started tracking my sleep with a wearable. I happened to wear the Oura Ring, and I saw information that stopped me cold in my track. For example, my REM sleep should have been about 20 to 25% of my total sleep, or roughly about 90 to 120 minutes a night. It was consistently half that. My deep sleep was also significantly below where it should have been. And my sleep latency, that's the time you spend in bed before you fall asleep, was often an hour, sometimes more. Ideally, this should be about 15 to 20 minutes. I was spending a lot of time in bed, but not getting deep restorative sleep. No wonder I was waking up feeling fatigued and having constant brain fog. I was spending enough time in bed, but I was not getting the restorative sleep that I needed. So here's why it matters so much after 50. REM sleep is when your brain consolidates memory and processes emotion. Deep sleep is when your body repairs tissues, when it regulates the hormones, and when your brain activates its glymphatic system, essentially the clean out crew, the overnight clean out crew, and it clears out the waste and toxic byproducts like the amyloid beta, and this is a protein associated with Alzheimer's disease. Now, poor sleep architecture, even with adequate amount of hours of sleep, means that this cleaning out process is shortchanged every single night. What did I change to fix this? I now prioritize sleep hygiene as seriously as I prioritize things like exercise. A cool, dark, quiet room. No caffeine after 2 p.m. Journaling when my brain, my mind is very busy. I want to quiet it down. And sometimes an evening walk to help my body wind down. These are tools that I use, and I found that my sleep data improved significantly. More importantly, though, was how I felt after. I was much more alert and awake and active. So the takeaway is measuring sleep by hours alone is not enough. How you feel in the morning gives you data. If you are waking up feeling refreshed, that tells you information. If you're waking up feeling fatigued, that also tells you information. The second habit is a sitting disease. And I'm talking about prolonged sitting, even if you exercise regularly. And this one surprised me, will probably surprise you too. When I transitioned to working mostly from home, I was actually working out more often than I did when I was working in the hospital. I did my daily walks. I strength train several times a week. I now do African dancing. I do flexibility exercise. So by every measure, I was active. And then I started noticing that I would sit down at my desk. I would get so engrossed in what I was doing, and I'd be there for 4 or 5 hours without getting up, without moving. I kind of assumed that because I had exercised that morning, that I was fine, but I was wrong. The research published in the Annals of Internal Medicine actually found that prolonged, uninterrupted sitting is an independent risk factor for increased mortality, even in people who meet all the physical activity guidelines. There was a 2020 study in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, and they found that sitting for more than 8 hours a day was associated with a significantly higher risk of cardiovascular disease, regardless of exercise habits. The mechanism, they believe, involves reduced circulation, decreased insulin sensitivity, elevated inflammatory markers, and impaired lipid metabolism. And all of these come together to accelerate the biological aging. Once I understood this, I made structural changes. I set an alarm to stand up. I move every 45 minutes. Sometimes you could just stand and get on your toes. That's great exercise. I got a standing desk as a part of my workday, so that I spend portion of my day on my feet. In fact, whenever I'm watching webinars, I have a mini stepper. I get on that. And I also have a stationary bike. And sometimes I will watch webinars or classes on that. So movement doesn't have to be intense to break the sitting cycle, but you just need to move, and it needs to be frequent. So the takeaway here is your morning workout does not cancel out 8 hours of sitting there. Break it up, be deliberate about it, build movement into your work environment. Don't just exercise and rely on that. Habit number 3 is eating well overall, but snacking on ultra-processed foods. Whew. This one is sneaky because it hides behind an otherwise healthy diet, right? So even when I was eating well, when I worked long hours, what I found was I would run and grab things like granola bars, right? It felt like it was reasonable, right? I was missing a meal, I'd grab these bars, and you would say to yourself, well, it has oats, it sounds healthy. And one day I actually read the label and I found that it was loaded with added sugar. And there was really very little nutritional value. I was treating it as a bridge between meals, but what it was doing was actually harming me and doing more harm than I realized. Ultra-processed foods are defined not just by their ingredients, but by the degree of industrial processing that occurs with them. They're engineered to be hyperpalatable, meaning that your brain reward system is going to respond to them similarly to how it responds to addictive substances. There was a 2024 meta-analysis that was published in the BMJ, and it analyzed data from over 9 million people. And what it found was that higher ultra-processed food consumption was associated with 32 adverse health outcomes, including things like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, depression, and even all-cause mortality. The particular danger for women over 50 is that many ultra-processed foods are marketed as healthy things, right? If you think of protein bars, flavored yogurts, low-fat snacks, diet drinks, these all fall squarely in this category. The label says healthy, but the chemistry says otherwise. So what do you do with this information? Well, I keep whole food options readily available so that I don't snack on processed foods. So I'll have things like a handful of walnuts, a piece of fruit, a vegetable stick with hummus. So these are real foods. They don't have a label that you have to read. They're real whole foods. And the takeaway here is that you want to audit your snacks, not just your meals, but what you eat in between, because you can mess up your healthy diet by having unhealthy snacks. Habit 4, social isolation disguised as introversion or being busy. Why do I know this? This one is really the most uncomfortable to talk about because it looks responsible from the outside. After leaving hospital medicine, I found myself with fewer social interactions. There were no more daily rounds, no team meetings, no colleagues that I would meet in the hallway. And so honestly, after years of having a demanding schedule, the quiet actually felt earned. And I'm a natural introvert. I enjoy solitude. I really genuinely enjoy solitude. But there is a meaningful difference between chosen restorative solitude and chronic social isolation. And the line between the two can be crossed easier than people realize. Like, I really have to pay attention to that. One of the longest running Harvard studies on human happiness, spanning over 80 years, found that the quality of our relationships, that this was the single strongest predictor of health and happiness later in life. Not cholesterol, not income, but relationships, right? There was also a meta-analysis that was done, published in Perspective of Psychological Science, and I'll have it in the link below. And it showed that 25% increase in premature mortality. In other words, loneliness was comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes. And so for women over 50 specifically, social isolation is associated with accelerated cognitive decline. We even see higher rates of depression. We see elevated cortisol, the stress hormone, increased inflammatory markers from loneliness, all accelerated by loneliness, and they increase biological aging. So what I do now is I have to be intentional. I choose quality over quantity in my relationships, right? I always have done that anyway, but I protect my time for genuine connection. I have periodic virtual coffee meetups with former colleagues or friends that are far away. I volunteer at a free clinic. I have check-ins with my family on a daily basis. And I have a community of women over 50 that I interact with. I've set these things up so that I can protect that social connection. This becomes a part of my health practice in the same way that exercise is. So the takeaway is being an introvert is not the same as being socially isolated, right? Check honestly whether your solitude is restorative or whether it has quietly morphed into disconnection. And if it has, fix it. Habit 5, one drink at night and thinking it's safe. I want to address this one carefully because it is one of the most deeply normalized habits in our culture. And actually, the science has shifted significantly in recent years, and people are not aware of that. I don't generally drink personally, but in my clinical career and in interacting with colleagues, I see this regularly. People will have 1 or 2 glasses of wine every single evening to relax, to unwind, and they believe that it will help them to fall asleep. And it feels moderate to them, right? It feels responsible, and studies years ago used to say that that was normal. You remember the studies on red wine that said it was good for your heart. But here is what we now know. In recent studies, we know that the sleep, that alone should give you pause. Alcohol may actually help you to fall asleep faster, but it significantly disrupts your sleep architecture. And I talked about that earlier. Alcohol will suppress your REM sleep. And remember, you need that for memory consolidation and for brain cleaning. So nightly drinks might feel like it will help you to sleep, but it actually degrades the quality of your overall sleep and it may keep you awake. Beyond sleep, there was a landmark study in 2018 published in The Lancet. It analyzed data from 195 countries and it looked at the safest level of alcohol for consumption and actually found that it's zero, right? The previous thinking around moderate consumption was that it was protective. That has been shown to not be the case. It's been challenged by more rigorous research. Those research have really look at the confounding factors. And what they actually found is that this kind of drinking, what we used to call moderate drinking, is actually associated with a reduce in brain volume, with a greater loss in regions involved in memory and executive function. So moderate drinking can affect your brain health. And particularly over 50, where we see issues already, we really want to be careful with that. So the takeaway is a nightly alcohol ritual, particularly after 50, especially if you think it's going to help with sleep or stress, it's not it. There are more effective, less costly strategies that you can use. Habit 6, ignoring new symptoms and waiting to see if they go away. Oh my God, this is so common. I've seen this pattern more times than I can count in clinical practice. There is a particular kind of magical thinking that happens after 50 where we normalize symptoms. I was listening to a podcast last night and the guy was talking about, his persistent back pain and his fatigue. And he's like, I'm 60. What do you expect? Joint pain becomes, that's just how it is now. Fatigue just becomes, I'm over 50. A mole that looks slightly different, we file that under, it's probably just nothing, it's just age, right? The problem is that after 50, the diseases that matter the most, like cardiovascular disease, cancer, when we catch them early, that's the best time to treat them. In fact, we want to be able to see you before symptoms start to protect you from having symptoms. In many cases, waiting is a decision that carries major consequences. As a lifestyle medicine physician, I'm a strong advocate for prevention. Prevention requires showing up for the data even when you feel fine. It requires you taking new symptoms seriously rather than hoping that they resolve on their own or saying, oh, it's nothing. So what I do, I don't wait for symptoms to schedule preventative care, and you shouldn't either, right? And when something new appears, especially if it persists beyond a week or two, I investigate it rather than normalize it. The peace of mind alone is worth it. The takeaway here is your body communicates before it breaks down. After 50, listening to it is not being a hypochondriac. It is wisdom. Habit 7, the final one, invisible sun damage, assuming that cloudy means safe. I moved to Florida several years ago where the sun is present and powerful, essentially year-round. And I still make this mistake. I remember going for a 3-mile walk. I walk almost daily. And it was so cloudy. I was like, okay, I didn't put sunscreen on. There was no hat. There was no sunglasses. When I got home, I had a visible tan. You saw the line of demarcation. And this was on a cloudy day. That was the moment I understood what I already knew intellectually. It just reminded me. So here's the science. There are 2 types of ultraviolet radiation that reach the skin. UVA, these rays will penetrate more deeply into the dermis and are responsible for photoaging, collagen breakdown, age spots, and DNA damage. And these are going to contribute to skin cancer risk. The UVA rays are present at consistent level year-round, and they will pass through cloud cover. They will pass through standard car and office windows. you can accumulate significant UVA exposure on a completely overcast day or while sitting at a desk near the window. And after 50, the skin's ability to repair UV-induced DNA damage declines, making consistent protection even more important. It shouldn't be less, it should be more. So what do I do now without exception? SPF is in my daily moisturizer, so I slap it on every single day, regardless of the weather, regardless of whether it looks overcast outside. I have my hat at all times, my sunglasses because you don't want to risk cataract or macular degeneration. And if I'm in a car, I will opt for the options where the window is tinted. If I go outside, I'll try to avoid the times of the day when the sun is the strongest, right, in the middle of the day. So often you'll hear me say I go for a morning walk or an evening walk. SPF is not just for the beach. It should be something you do daily. It should be non-negotiable after 50 especially. So these are 7 things that I just shared, and here's what they have in common. None of them feel dangerous in the moment. Poor sleep architecture feels like tiredness. Prolonged sitting, especially when you work out, feels like productivity. If you grab a granola bar or some unhealthy snack, it feels like a reasonable choice. Social isolation feels like you're just being an introvert protecting your time. And one drink a night feels like self-care. But these things can affect you if you don't pay attention. They quietly cause worsening health. They don't announce themselves loudly, they quietly do it. But the good news is, once you're aware, you can make changes and you can see the changes. You don't have to fix all 7 today. Just pick 1 or 2 that resonated most with you and recognize where you are in these and start there. And if this video helped you, please go ahead and like it and share it with another woman who you think would benefit from hearing this. And of course, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out tips on healthy aging for women over 50. And by the way, let me know in the comments which one of these surprised you the most, which one resonated with you.